Serious. What's the creepiest, scariest thing that you've seen but no one believes you? Story 1. It would help if I had pictures to explain the setting here, but I used to fish at an abandoned houses pond near my home. Next to that property was a wealthy neighborhood of about 6 houses, mansions. One day, while getting off the bus, I saw a black Mercedes with fully tinted windows, which is rare in New Jersey, sitting in the driveway of the pond house. I found it odd and was kind of sad because I thought I'd never get to fish there again. The next day, I found out the man who lived at the end of the wealthy neighborhood had been shot in the head while he slept. Rumor has it he was involved in the mafia. I believe those rumors. Story 2. I was sleeping at my cousin's house on New Year's Eve 2014. My 3 cousins, brother, and I all decided to sleep in the same bedroom as our parents were staying out all night. We were old enough to stay at home on our own. Point is, we were 100 the only people in the house that night, and all slept in the same place. Woke up the next day and was getting in the car to leave when I had a look at my camera roll from the previous night. To my absolute horror, there were 5 photos of us all sleeping. Every single person was in the photos fast asleep, so there was no way any of us took them. My aunt showed the photos to the landlord and he had no explanation. To this day, nobody knows who took them. Edit removed unimportant info. Here are the photos. Faces blurred as I haven't asked my cousin's permission. Also, the dog was very old at that time. He was a deep sleeper and wouldn't wake up when anyone walked into a room. Stranger or otherwise. He didn't even bark at the postman. Story 3. When I was little, 7 or 8, I woke up one night to a white dog sitting in the doorway of my bedroom. This was weird because we didn't have a dog or any other indoor pets. While I watched, it got up and went down the hall towards the living room. I got up, looked down the dark, empty hall, and went the opposite direction to my parents' room. I woke my mom up and told her there was a dog in the house. She got up and we looked, but didn't find anything. She thought I was dreaming. At some point when I was older, I found a picture of the dog my parents had when I was a baby. I learned from my mom that the dog often slept in my doorway, guarding my room. But the dog died before I was 2. The dog in the picture was the dog I saw that night. Answer: protecting, even though being dead. Dogs do have some special bond with people, though not always. My now late uncle was diagnosed with cancer in his mouth and was staying full days at home because of his weakening health and the increasingly speedy growth of the cancerous infection. He owned a dog, a Doberman if I remember clearly. He, I call dogs he and she instead of it, was a really strong and ferocious. His name was Joro, named after the character Zorro. My uncle's son had to hold Joro's chain with all his strength when we used to visit him, or else Joro might cause a massacre. He was really very protective to my uncle and his family. He was trained by a professional and was always full of energy. But at one time when my uncle's health was getting very weak, Joro started to stay under my uncle's bed without motion and sound. It was weird to see Joro so silent and still. He didn't even bark once when we came next to him. 2 days later, in the early morning, we found out that Joro passed away my uncle's bed, and my uncle was feeling better. The doctors were surprised to see that the infection has stopped spreading and was safer to be removed via surgery. My uncle lived almost a year longer until the cancer took even a greater hold at him, X200B. I still remember seeing Joro lying under my uncle's bed a day before he passed away. His ferocious and angry eyes were silent. In his eyes, I now saw sadness, deep sadness, and a sort of wisdom, as if he knew what was going to happen, or rather, what he was doing. The things I didn't see in his eyes were fear or regret. To this day, all of us in the family still say that Joro gave his life in exchange of my uncle's. Story 4. Right after high school, class of 91, I got a contract job with the Forest Service. We traveled all over the West doing gopher control in replanted clear cuts. The gophers would eat the tender roots of the newly planted saplings, and we had to control them to give the trees a chance to get started. We were returning to our hometown after a long job in Oregon, driving across the desert near a government lab. It's about 3 a.m., we're going about 80 in a 55-millimeter zone. Suddenly, a semi-truck, completely blacked out, no lights at all, bombs past us on this stretch of highway like we were standing still. Then, 2 Army-style trucks, also blacked out. Scared the shoot out of us. Got back to our hometown. Told several people what we saw. No one would believe us. I still think they are doing freaky shoot out there in that desert lab. If we'd tried to chase them or anything, we probably would have disappeared. TLDR. Freaky blacked-out government trucks from a secret lab blew past us in the dark. Answer. This story isn't really fitting for the OP, but your story reminded me of something I saw once. My boyfriend and I were on a kayak trip up in the center coast of BC, Canada, in a remote area, and we had watched the sunset from the shoreline of our island camp, and it was now dark and we were just sitting and talking. Suddenly, on the horizon in the distance appears this big, bright white light, and it races at water level from one end of our view to the other end, turns away from us a bit, and eventually disappears behind an island. It was very large, steady, and insanely fast, crossed the entire horizon in like 5 seconds. We figured it could have been some sort of military or research vessel, but it would have had to be going full out, faster than we thought a ship like that could go. It did seem too big and too fast from our perspective, but sometimes perspective gets lost over water. If it was a research-type vessel, it had to be one of the truly massive ones. Something about the thought of a big ship just absolutely trucking around in the middle of nowhere seemed sort of unnerving or sinister, like something from the movies. Wish I could find out somehow if it was government. Or research, or what? Very official and in a hurry, whatever it was. Story 5. In college, I had a summer internship in a national park that had just ended a wolf reintroduction program. A number of interns were housed in an area of cabins clustered together on a 1-lane gravel road. I was staying in a different area of the park and had gone over to the cabins for dinner one night. I left pretty late, close to midnight, and was enjoying the quiet walk down the road to my car. It was a clear night with a full moon, and the conifers growing on either side of the road shaded it almost entirely. As I'm walking, I see a light-colored shape on the other side of the road, coming in my direction. I kept walking slowly, and as we drew toward each other, I saw that it was an enormous canid of some sort, far too big to be a coyote. But as far as we knew, all the wolves had been relocated. We each kept our pace, and it never turned its head or anything, just kept walking. I somehow managed not to piss myself, but by the time I got into my car, was shaking so hard I could barely get my key in the ignition. Everyone I've told thinks I was exaggerating, but I was stone-cold sober, less than 10 feet from it, and that animal's back was up to my waist, easily the biggest dog creature I've ever seen. Edit. To clarify, I did see it clearly in the moonlight when it was close. It had the coloring and general characteristics, narrow head-snout shape, ears, of a light-phase coyote, but the bulk and size of a wolf, larger than any Great Pyrenees I've seen. Looking back, it was definitely a benign encounter. 2 folks out for a stroll, passing each other on the street. Second edit, East Tennessee. And yes, as discussed in the comments several times, it probably was a coy wolf. Answer. Was this by chance at Yellowstone? Only asking because I visited there several years ago and we became friendly with a waiter in a restaurant there who told us about a huge wolf they have that wanders the park. He said he saw it once and it was nearly twice the size of a regular wolf. He also said it wasn't aggressive or anything, just looked at him for a bit before walking away. I'm not sure about any relocation programs in Yellowstone, but it sounds like it might be the same wolf. Story 6. Doing a service call on an apartment. This lady has obvious obsession with dolls, like those 15-inch tall, pioneer-looking dolls. She's not home, so I go about my business, very uncomfortable, and even more so when I enter her bedroom. She literally has 300 dolls with doll heads tied to strings from the ceilings and a small little altar-like thing in the corner of her bedroom with a severed chicken head and gargoyle-like statues and pictures of children. There's a pig's hoof hanging from a red cord in her bathroom. When I get to the dining room, there's a Ouija board and multiple dolls all arranged around a dismembered doll that's drenched in what I think was blood. X200B. I think I broke the human top speed record that day. No one believes me to this day. Answer. Was Prawley voodoo and was or had performed a blessing for the children in the photo. Spent some time in Haiti and the old women would do this with photos of people they cared about. The goats and chickens throw most people off, but it was probably a caring grandma just doing her ritual to make sure the kids are safe today. Maybe that is not what is going on, but I just tell myself that. Story 7. My mom and I were driving through rural Missouri late one night. It was dark and hard to see much beyond the headlights. All of a sudden, something scampered, across the road in front of our car. We didn't hit it, but when it got to the other side of the road, on the shoulder, it sat up on its hind legs, turned around and looked directly at us. It had a long, thin tail, too thin to be a foxtail, too big in general to be a squirrel or possum. To this day, we both swear it was a monkey. People don't believe us, but the way it turned back and looked at us once it got to the other side of the road was so chilling and human-like. Based on the size, shape, and movement, it could only be a monkey. Story 8. My mom used to always yell at me to close the pantry door, and one day when I was home alone, I got a snack and left the door open. As I was walking away, the door slammed shut, and I heard a voice say, "Close it," quietly but intensely. I swear I literally grabbed my dog and ran faster than I ever have before, up to my room and locked the door. Let's just say I literally will never forget to shut that darn door. Story 9. I once walked into my living room to see a football that I have never seen before, lying in the middle of the room, vertically. It fell on one side when I guess it noticed me and proceeded to roll into the kitchen and behind the counter and out of view. After standing there from awe and confusion, I went to look for it. It wasn't there. Never saw it again. Answer. This happened to me but with a lizard. I was in my room at my computer and saw something moving on the floor from the corner of my eye. A lizard was just strolling across the floor, and I gasped and the lizard froze and opened its mouth and sort of gasped back at me. After a second or two of us staring at each other, the lizard took off behind my drawers. I couldn't find it anywhere, so either I'll find a lizard skeleton in a few years, it successfully ran outside, or I was hallucinating lol. Story 10. In high school, I briefly dated a gothy chick whose idea of a good time was to hang out, and yeah, occasionally make out, in the old graveyard out on the edge of town. Not my favorite thing in the world, but she was cute, and I was 16. So there you have it. One night she told me to meet her there. Place was dark and empty, as always. I had my phone flashlight and was poking my way through the headstones to the tree that was our usual meet-up spot when I saw some movement in my peripheral vision. Turned the light to where I thought it was in time to see a silhouette move behind a headstone about 30 yards away. I was sure it was her trying to scare me, which she sometimes did, and called out to her, and in response I heard a female voice, but not hers, call the same name back to me, like it was mocking me. I turned and sprinted back to the road. I texted her from my car. She said she hadn't left her house yet. I canceled on her and drove home. Story 11. My friends and I used to frequently visit the abandoned Joseph P. Ladd School. It was rumored to be haunted. Most of the time, I just assumed the noises were other people on the property. I had never experienced anything supernatural there, just, scared cause of the circumstances of what could happen. One of the last times I was there, I brought my crowbar because the state had started boarding up and welding doors shut. So here I am, trying to pry open a small enough gap in between these two doors. There was a good 6-inch space between them where it was open. After a few tries, getting pretty aggravated, saying to myself, is this fudge worth it? It was a pretty well-lit night. The moon was really bright, so I didn't need my flashlight unless I was inside a building. Also didn't use it because of the risk of alerting security. So I'm peering through these two doors down this hall with my flashlight, and about 50 feet down the hallway, it looked like some light dust came into view. So the dust entered where my flashlight was aimed, and then suddenly I turned. I could see the cloudily, barely visible outline of a chest, shoulders, and head. Nothing else. As it turned, I can still vividly remember of what appeared to be the ghostly, misty outline of shoulders and head moving towards the flashlight. So as any person would, I ran away and screamed. Never had been so scared in my life. Story 12. With a bunch of kids playing around the street when I notice a floating stick. There's no trees around and everyone else saw it. Put my hands around it to make sure it wasn't a spider's web or string, but it was definitely floating. The moment I touched it, it fell. Still can't explain it to this day. Story 13. I was driving to South Dakota to visit family, drove all night. Around 7 a.m., tired, almost 45 minutes to my destination, I look east from the HWI, and deep in the plains there was this huge golden bridge silhouetted structure. Mended with the clouds and the sparkle of the sun, it almost looked heavenly-esque. I mean, it looked small from the car, but I understand depth perception, and up close that would be a huge Golden Gate-sized structure. Looks like it stretched from north to south as far as I could see. Rubbed my eyes, still there. I just remember thinking I'm fudge tired as shoot. I've driven this road many times, and there ain't shoot that way except grassy plains. Fast forward maybe a year or two, I'm back in South Dakota working for the summer with my family. One day for work we had to drive down this same road early, around 8-ish a.m. When one of the guys goes, "Remember this one morning, we were driving down this same road for work, and this golden bridge-looking thing, huge as fudge, was on the horizon over there," pointing to the east where I saw it years earlier. All of a sudden, instantly when he said that, I remembered that moment from years earlier. I freaked out. Because I thought I was hallucinating, but they described exactly what I saw. This is South Dakota, and there ain't no huge golden bridge-looking object anywhere in that state. Still baffles me to this day. Try not to think too much on it because I haven't seen it since. Weird as shoot, though. Sorry I diverted from the original prompt, but this event popped into my head when I read it. Story 14. When I was 17, I was up late one night watching a movie in my living room. I was living in a condo at the time, a smallish building, only 3 stories, so not a lot of people. It was mostly middle-aged people and in a nice end of town, so we rarely heard noise from neighbors, especially late at night. So the movie ends and the credits roll. It's about 2 a.m. I'm playing on my phone and the condo is pretty quiet. Suddenly, I hear a noise coming from the front door. It sounded like a long nail or claw, slowly dragging across the door, and then a soft tap, tap, tap. This repeats several times. Meanwhile, I am shoot myself. It was the most eerie, ominous sound. I felt like I was in a horror movie. I was too scared to go look out the peephole because I thought whoever it was might see my shadow looking out as lights were on near the door. Who knows what they want? I'm not out here trying to die. The horrible scraping noise carries on for about 30 seconds and then stops. 20 minutes later, I get the guts to look in the hallway and nothing is there and no marks are on the door. I still get heebie-jeebies thinking about it. Story 15. I was about 4 to 6 years old and my mother was telling me to get ready for bed. I remember hopping on the bed and going straight for the window. I pulled open the curtains dramatically. I was face to face with a giant fly moth head. Its face was staring straight at me and was huge, almost like a mask pulled over someone's head. I became hysterical trying to express what I saw and was told it was my imagination. Now, this was in the window to the backyard. Our house was on a foundation above ground, so that window was 10 feet off the ground. It's been over 17 years, and I remember that. Creatures staring back and the sheer horror of its eyes. Can't bring myself to look out of windows at night. Story 16. When I was 3-4 years old, I had a best friend named Abigail. We did everything together. Played in the sandbox, creeks and rivers, playgrounds, you name it. We were sidekicks. I even drew her portrait one day and told my mom to save it somewhere safe so I could give it to her on her birthday. I still have it somewhere, but I drew a girl with dark shoulder-length hair with a red bow in it. She was wearing a blue jumper-like dress with a long-sleeve red shirt under it, and brown shoes. You'll have to find it to show you. I just remember I loved playing with her, and then one day I just never saw her again. Now, if this were my mom telling the story, she would say that at this age I was just an independent little girl who liked to play and be by herself. She just thought Abigail was an imaginary friend. Until one day when I was about 11 years old, the local historical society posted a researched historical article detailing the events of a tragic farmhouse fire that happened about 75-80 years prior on the property that our subdivision was built on. The fire was devastating, in which a family of 6, 2 parents and 4 kids, were all eliminated. One of those kids was a 4-year-old and her name was Abigail. A picture of the family was included in the article, black and white, but you could clearly see the little girl had dark shoulder-length hair with a bow in it and was wearing a jumper with a long-sleeve shirt under it. To this day, my mom still refuses to believe my best friend was probably a ghost. Answer. My brother-in-law had an imaginary friend when he was very young, and he is absolutely convinced to this day that she was a ghost. He said they would play together all the time, and even though he had 3 older brothers, he preferred to play with her. He recalls her waking him up in the middle of the night to play football with him in the hallway outside his bedroom, and he would always get up and play even though he knew he would get in trouble for it, because if he didn't, he said she would sit next to the bed and cry. She wore a red dress and little black shoes. He also remembers the last time he played with her. She told him she would have to leave soon and he would never see her again. He was devastated and asked her why, and she replied that he was getting too old now. He's a big, super strong, no-nonsense, kinda intimidating guy these days, but when he talks about his little friend, he gets very serious and emotional. It's real to him. Story 17. I used to live in an old 3-story row house with my father, mother, and older brother. It was fairly typical in that it made some old house sounds and had some areas that never really saw natural light, staircase, downstairs hallway. It was a pretty normal place, but in the late 80s, my father took his own life. Over the course of about a year, we had a multitude of unusual happenings in the house. Most things small, shadows moving, and objects not being where you left them. But some things borderline violent happened too, like an old lamp exploding and doors slamming shut. I was primarily the person who saw these things happening. That leads me to the biggest incident. I've told my mother, my brother, some friends, and now my wife. But no one thinks it happened the way I remember it. I was 9 years old. My father had been gone for almost a year. I'm sitting on my bed reading when a young man, maybe in his late 20s, looking disheveled and confused, opens my bedroom door. Startled, I shout, "Mom, there's a guy in my room." He stood there for a second and looked straight ahead. "What do you want?" I asked, and he walked straight through my room and through the wall that connected to the neighbors, as if he was immaterial. Immediately next door, I heard a scream of blood, curdling terror from my neighbor. She was screaming and crying loudly, and you could hear physical commotion. I kept shouting for my mom, who came in and comforted me, who was crying and terrified. I told her what had happened, and she could hear the screaming next door. She went over to the neighbors.